Welcome to Raw America. We've got another great episode for everyone here, all of our subscribers tuning in. Thank you so much for joining. Also, feel free to pop off in the chat. Everyone who's coming on, let us know what you think in the chat. Write some comments. Any questions that you have, feel free to bring those up. I'm Carl Gibson, Raw America managing editor. We're here with Virginia Heffernan today. She's a columnist for the New Republic. Virginia also has a Substack called Magic Plus Loss. You can find her virginiaheffernan.substack.com. She also has a podcast, which is called Omni Shambles, and she does that with Cy Canterell from Slate. Virginia, welcome. Thanks for coming on board, and we really appreciate it. Glad to have you.
I'm so happy to be here. We were just talking about, I love this new media ecosystem. I love how eccentric it is. That's my favorite part. I think it's just, there's so many unexpected parts to it. It's just the opposite of any media I'd ever been a part of. And I get to meet all these new people.
Yeah, and absolutely. And of course, like everyone who is you coming on Raw America, like we're really interested in, of course, holding this regime accountable. We're interested in what's happening to the media right now, and everyone's kind of looking for a place to go as all these newspapers get bought up, all these TV stations get bought out, the billionaires are shutting down important reporting. Here at Raw America, independent journalism thrives, and we love it. We support it. That's why we're very excited to have you here, Virginia. I want to get right into it here. So, one thing that I'm really interested in hearing more about is this Epstein Ranch investigation in New Mexico. I understand it's the Zora Ranch in New Mexico, which, by the way, for our readers who are not familiar, is owned by a businessman named Don Huffines, who is the Republican nominee for Texas State Comptroller. Trump endorsed him. He's also the owner of the Epstein Ranch. And so, Virginia, there's a lot of rumors about the Zora Ranch. Are there bodies buried there? A lot of abuse happened here at this ranch. And activists in New Mexico have been pushing for this for a long time. So give us some of the latest details on this new investigation, what people are hoping to find, anyone who might be held accountable.
Yeah. So I don't. People may have run into the congresswoman who has been really the face of this is Christine Stansbury from the Santa Fe area of New Mexico. She's in the U.S. Congress, and I think I first came across this announcement that a truth commission had launched in New Mexico via Representative Stansbury's TikTok. It drew my attention because a truth commission is obviously an idea that we haven't heard about in a long time, that we haven't heard about in America. And it harkens back as a notion to the one launched famously in South Africa on apartheid in 1996. So these are commissions that are set up to investigate, adjudicate, repair, and make reparations for human rights abuses. So in South Africa, it was apartheid in 1996. And then Canada launched a truth commission on the Indian residential schools in 2008. And these things are imperfect, but their ambition is something that really caught my attention. So a truth commission it's in our wildest dreams, but while we're holding a place for a time when this, meaning Trump, meaning this era, the Trump Epstein, the reign of terror that the Trump Epstein class has had in the United States, when this is over, that there might be a way that we could actually get truth, justice, accountability for the American people who have been affected by human rights abuses, who have had to endure concentration camps, who have had to endure incredible danger and suffering at the hands of the Epstein class. So just the idea that New Mexico was launching a truth commission, in this case, focused on one of Jeffrey Epstein's properties in New Mexico, that I found in an even broader way than New Mexico, extremely encouraging. It let me raise my expectations for what might be possible.
Well, and talking about the Epstein glass, the New Mexico ranch, the more you read about it, it's pretty horrifying. I understand that Epstein bought the Zora Ranch with the specific purpose of trying to create a whole nother, like, everyone knows about his private island, but this was a place where he envisioned himself, like, breeding future generations. And it was just a lot of really weird stuff. And I noticed too when Don Huffines bought this property, which I can't remember the year off the top of my head when he bought it, but I know he got a huge discount on it because his lawyers petitioned the state saying, "Hey, we think this price is too high given everything that happened." So, like knowing the history behind that property and still choosing to buy it, uh, and then of course, this investigation coming, this Truth Commission coming out. Uh, I can't imagine. Now, of course, this might be a blue wave year. We never know, but I can't imagine this is helping Don Huffines politically. I can't imagine he kind of wants this attention. Uh, is there any, movement towards, depending on what the Truth Commission finds, towards finding, I understand some people have worried about Epstein has possibly buried some bodies of his victims out there. People are trying to say, we need to dig this property up. I think Don Huffines has even said, okay, look, anything you guys want to do, go do it.
Yeah.
When does that work really start? And, what
Yeah.
do we think could be the timeline for, getting some justice for those victims?
Yeah. So I just want to back up a little bit so everyone can get sort of the lay of the land here. In 1993, Epstein bought this tract of land south of Santa Fe, and built in 1999 this house that, when I heard they were looking for cadavers on the site, it occurred to me that this kind of weird flesh-colored monstrosity of a house that he built looks cadaverous itself. I mean, there's something incredibly ominous about the drone's eye views of this place. People should look it up if they want to see what I mean. Um, and especially knowing what went on there. So New Mexico has never liked Zorro Ranch, even though Epstein really cultivated two different governors. The first one who sold him the land was Governor King, and the Bruce King and King's family still own the land around Zorro Ranch. And then the second governor he cultivated was Bill Richardson, who showed up in the Epstein files and is said by Virginia Giuffre to have raped her at the ranch, that she was brought in for him to rape her. I mean, these are Democratic politicians. Bill Richardson was kind of a god, known as known as a brilliant negotiator and diplomat. So once again, this is a bipartisan. The Trump Epstein class is a bipartisan outfit, and the suffering inflicted by them was done by both Democrats and Republicans. So anyway,
Well,
he cultivated them. Yeah, so he cultivated them, and that was part of the way he got room to build this house. But locals never liked it. It put a ton of burden, as you can imagine, on this land that, he put an airstrip in, he put a firehouse in, there's a giant pool, of course. He just built this Xanadu, and he built it there to be near Los Alamos, home of the Manhattan Project, so he could do his own Manhattan Project, which it was seeding a master race with his own DNA. The Times has reported a lot on this. And all of that, did not endear him or this project to New Mexicans. And so he found themselves in an uneasy place. And now there's a female dominated blue legislature, state legislature, and they are the ones fighting to fighting for justice for the survivors.
well, like you said, Melanie Stansbury on the oversight committee has been
Yep.
doing a lot at the federal level as
Yep.
well. When you're talking about the bipartisan nature of the Epstein class, I feel like that's so important to touch on because Epstein had his fingers everywhere.
Yeah.
You did some really brilliant reporting on Epstein's influence on Harvard in particular. And there's a really alarming picture that I've got it pulled up here, one of your articles. So there's a picture here. And if people look up the Billionaires Eugenics Project, how Epstein infiltrated Harvard, muzzled the humanities, and preached master race science. Virginia, you wrote this piece in February. And there's a photo in here that's pretty astounding. So you can see Jeffrey Epstein sitting at a table with Alan Dershowitz, with Lawrence Summers, who was the former Treasury Secretary, also former Harvard president, and Steven Pinker. And so they're all yucking it up at this table. And Virginia, you did some reporting on Epstein's influence on Harvard through a intellectual quote unquote salon called Edge, which appears to be a billionaire funded effort to basically sanitize these really sick people to Ivy League institutions like Harvard. Talk about the influence that Epstein had on this particular institution, this educational powerhouse that is Harvard University.
Yeah. So the way that I came to this story is that I, like a lot of journalists and people, put my name into the Epstein files search bar, and it came up something like 11 times. And that was obviously disturbing. And I looked into why, and it was that Epstein and I were both on the receiving end of emails from an organization that we both belonged to and that he was the sponsor of. And it was this intellectual salon called Edge. So, Edge was for intellectuals, but a lot of pseudo intellectuals also. Had enormous numbers. And I was invited by my literary agent to join. I never got much out of it. But whenever you see pictures of like David Brooks or Richard Dawkins or Alan Dershowitz and Jeffrey Epstein, or in the orbit of Jeffrey Epstein, it's almost always at these Edge events. The most famous of which are the billionaires dinners that often happened around the TED conference. Jeffrey Epstein would fly intellectuals, legitimate, intellectuals, out on his plane to Northern California. They would talk at TED, and then there were kind of after parties, and Epstein often brought girls to those parties. But also they hosted not only these intellectuals, many of whom were headquartered at Harvard. Some of them had Nobel Prizes, but they also brought billionaires, so much that the dinners, came to be known as billionaire dinners. And you could see Jeff Bezos, you could see Elon Musk, you could see Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, you name it, the usual cast of characters. Introducing smart people from Harvard to billionaires is a match made in heaven, because billionaires like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and also you name it, private equity people like to see themselves as intellectuals. They like to see themselves as having lots of good ideas, and they love to get to say, I sat down with this. I sat down with Marvin Minsky, or I sat down with Sam Harris, or I sat down, with Alan Dershowitz, and we were talking about XYZ. But you know why intellectuals like to sit down with billionaires? Because they don't have any money, and they want people to fund their research. And so this match made in heaven led to projects like the it's called PED, literally, but Program for Evolutionary Dynamics at Harvard, which was their evolutionary psychology department that Epstein sponsored, and that ultimately, started preaching eugenics, rape apologetics, all that stuff, all the just asking questions, intellectual dark web stuff started to be asked at Harvard. So one example of Steven Pinker's list of these just asking questions is that he published on the Edge site. And remember, Edge is sponsored by Jeffrey Epstein. So this is Jeffrey Epstein's guy. Do victims of sexual abuse actually suffer lifelong damage? Did Native Americans actually engage in genocide and wreck the landscape? Do men have an innate tendency to rape? And then finally, is homosexuality the symptom of an infectious disease? I hope that listeners can recognize this style of question, which are like the anti-woke style of question, the free press style of question, the intellectual dark web style of just like, you know what, I'm just asking questions. Maybe women want to be raped. Maybe Native Americans all genocided themselves. These are being asked at Harvard. They were being asked at Harvard, and Jeffrey Epstein was paying for them to ask these questions. So teeing up this anti-woke project, this like faddish anti-woke project where you just ask the opposite of everything that's true, and culminating in, some of the worst tendencies of the like Joe Rogan class now. And then also coming up with this idea that men of Epstein's descent, so Ashkenazi descent, were biologically selected for high intelligence and thus should breed in New Mexico in this eugenics project. I mean, I would say you can't make this stuff up, but it's got to be something stronger than that. I mean, this is the most toxic brew of just horrific Hitlerian ideology, money, and intellectual prestige. And it's just terrible for anyone that had to live through this. For men and students at Harvard, elites at Harvard who got taught this bullshit, and then the underclass who were crushed by it, including the women that Epstein trafficked to New Mexico.
Well, it's like for Epstein to fund something whose acronym is PED.
Yep.
I mean, that's like almost rubbing our face in it at this point.
And at
you're
Harvard, like, this isn't like a
yeah.
funny video game or something like happening at a nightclub. This is like at Harvard, just sitting as like a middle finger to, to everyone, and also just coarsening everyone's education. Like, even if people don't care about all the women victims, we're all victims of something like this. When the, money that could have gone to like the art history department, or, or the, uh, teach people real
Medical
science,
research.
medical
Yeah,
research, exactly,
right.
that Harvard's been deprived of, and is going to tell just so stories about how men are innately rapists. Like, I just don't get how we got here, but we need a lot of reform.
Well, I think the heart of this article, and I encourage everyone to read it, it's really important if you want to understand Epstein's imprint on Harvard. You have this excerpt here. It says, billionaires really like thinkers who see their exploitation of the weak as a good and natural thing.
Yeah.
And of course, Epstein funneled as much as $20 million a year to men who shared his ideology, like you wrote.
Yeah.
And now, for Harvard to take this money, have they acknowledged any wrongdoing in terms of just the layers of shit that they're entangled with Epstein? Has there been any public mea culpa on Harvard's part for facilitating this?
Yeah, I'm really liking some of the comments here. They're really interesting. They have returned some of the donations that Epstein gave. MIT has also, and people have had to pay for their relationships with Jeffrey Epstein. So Joey Ito, whom I have always really liked and thought was really smart, used to run the MIT Media Lab. He took money from Epstein and stayed in close correspondence with him after Epstein was found guilty of soliciting underage women for prostitution in 2008. He stayed in touch with him, and so that was considered a firing offense. He left. The money had to be returned. Harvard has done some of that also, but the way that these ideas got um, insinuated themselves into the whole curriculum at Harvard is something that it'll take a long time to address. You know, Small things like Larry Summers, the president of Harvard. I did a PhD at Harvard. He was president when I was there. And at the time, he was a member of EDGE. So a member of, again, the intellectual organization that Epstein sponsored, had him as a member. He also is all over the Epstein files in many emails with Epstein. One of them in particular, he's asking how to seduce a much younger mentee of his and getting Epstein to serve as wingman to him. Epstein says, just get her to believe it's inevitable or something like that, or she's doomed to be with you. It's like elementary pickup artist stuff. That's what the president of Harvard is doing in his spare time. He was also, and became Treasury Secretary, so wielding still more power. Just a small thing is his wife, and his still wife, was the head of the was the director of graduate studies in the English department when I was there. So she had connections to Epstein, and she turned to Jeffrey Epstein to sponsor a project on poetry that ran on PBS. That, like, we just all, anyone interested in poetry, like, it was watching another Epstein sponsored project, and she really wanted Woody Allen to read some of the poetry. So, there were like, no, the humanities were touched by this across the board. And now we have a time where, because of wokery, which again is basically anti-rape, it's like it's very minor right now, like where wokery sits. I know someone was asking about it, but the rape apologetics and eugenics that define anti-woke thinking, right? So whatever woke thinking is, it's simply not that. So that's one way to think about it. That those arguments about wokery that drove to the anti-DEI policies of this administration then got this administration to deprive Harvard of funding for medical research. So we can all agree that cancer research is important. We do not need to do small conversations about whether Latinx or, we should say that like those ships have sailed so long ago. Nobody needs to worry. None of that stuff is being taught. They're barely being taught elementary feminism or that women should have the right to vote at Harvard. And still, they've been deprived of this money. And, this is intellectual life. This is if one field doesn't matter to you, maybe another does. If medical research doesn't matter to you, maybe economics does, or whatever you studied when you were in college. And certainly it doesn't matter if Harvard matters to you. Like Indiana University was also affected by this. The Big Ten were hugely affected by this. And just how people grow up and are educated.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us. We got about 250 people watching right now. Everyone, feel free to sound off in the chat. If you've got any questions, comments, always love to see them. If I can manage to read them, I will. I'm here with Virginia Heffernan. She's a columnist with The New Republic. She also has a podcast called On Me Shambles, and you can find her on Substack. She has a Substack called Magic Plus Loss. You can find that at virginiaheffernan.substack.com. I'm Carl Gibson, managing editor of Raw America. If you enjoyed this interview, if you like what we're doing, if you want to see more of it, please like and subscribe to us. It would mean an awful lot. Same with Virginia. She's doing great reporting. If you want to support good independent media, seek out journalists like Virginia who are actually doing the real reporting that you won't find in the billionaire-owned press. Virginia, I want to pivot a little bit because you wrote something else that I think touches on a lot of concerns that people have. And a little background. So last week or maybe week before, we hosted Jonathan Larson on our Substack live here. And he talked about his report where he broke the story about Pentagon or senior officers in the military were telling rank and file infantrymen and women about this being the end times in Iran. And we should all be thankful about what President Trump is doing to bring about the final battle with evil.
Mhm.
And, just really unhinged shit. And you did this really great article here, and see if I've got it pulled up. It's called White House, War Isn't Hell, War is Effing Awesome, You Are Hell. You wrote this for the New Republic in March. And there's a lot of great stuff in here, but I really want to hone in on how Trump's war in Iran, and of course, Pete Hegseth being a far-right evangelical Christian who is a member of this really bizarre faith tradition
Yeah.
that believes in some really extreme stuff. It kind of seems like, and of course, the military is very hierarchical. It's very well organized, and it's not easy to steer the entire United States military in this neo-fascist, Christo-fascist direction.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about what you found in terms of, this whole Iranian operation being heralded by the Christian right as, the beginning of Revelations.
Yeah. So the book of Revelation is the final book of the Bible. It's always been a little sketchy. It's not apocryphal, it is included in canon. But Martin Luther, so the sort of first Protestant, thought that the Jesus in it, who appears with a knife in his mouth, causing mass bloodshed, was not really the Jesus that he hoped as a Christian that people would be invested in. But he came around to the idea that there should be this kind of sci-fi video game Call of Duty style Jesus in the Bible because it would make people more resistant to sin if they also saw Jesus as like looks maxed and hyper manly. So Revelation sticks around, and in America, Protestants who maybe got tired of fighting about evolution or fighting about some of the things in the early books of the Hebrew Bible, and didn't maybe like the weakness of the social justice Jesus in the Gospels, got really into this pagan imagery in the book of Revelation. And the kind of conceit of the book of Revelation is that a war needs to come expeditiously now to catalyze the return of Jesus Christ to earth. And that battle needs to be fought on Armageddon. So Armageddon is not just a synonym for the apocalypse. Armageddon is a battlefield that shows up once in the book of Revelation in the whole Bible, but also a mythic battlefield, but is also a real place. It's the Greek word for something like Tel Megiddo or something like that. It's like a mountaintop actual battlefield north of Jerusalem in Israel. So somehow all of this came together in this chaotic, I don't know, crazy theology that says that there needs to be this final showdown between good and evil to bring the Messiah to earth and rebuild the temple and save the Christians, not save the Jews. Let's remind ourselves of that. Save anyone who can be delivered and from sin. Um, Up to heaven. Either Jesus will come and reign on earth for 1,000 years or something, something. I can't quite follow it. But this is in the brief for this war. So we are watching gas prices rise, losing billions of dollars a day, spending billions of dollars a day for Trump's ego project, killing, wiping out schools and school children in Iran, causing now thousands of casualties and counting, and setting the whole Middle East on fire because somebody was jacking off to like the weirdly dumbest book I've ever read, which includes like lambs with 7 eyes and locusts with human faces. That, psilocybin is like probably a quicker route to getting to see these things if that's what you want. And now I just had leaked to me some right-wing think tankers talking about how important it is in this war to make it a priority to rebuild Beit HaMikdash. I'm reading this from a text. Rebuild Beit HaMikdash. That's the temple. So rebuild the temple. And the second part is Moshiach now, which means Messiah now. This is like a briefing document in Washington using this kind of apocalyptic language straight out of the book of Revelation. How we got here, I don't know.
Well, and someone in the chat says Darius Jesus was on shrooms. You mentioned
Yeah.
psilocybin, and I know the Book of Revelation was based on a vision that John had. Maybe John had
Yeah.
some mushrooms before he went to sleep. Who knows? Uh, my dad is a pastor, actually, retired pastor,
Okay.
and he did a Revelation Bible study, and he kind of explained it's like this is not literal. This is all symbolic, and this is and he just broke it all down, and it was pretty wild. You wrote here in this article, 20 years ago. In other words, neocons and neolibs could justify war with quote unquote values, coded Christian,
Yep.
and interests, coded capitalist.
Yep.
Violent superstitions were supposed to belong to the other side. Today, Trump's men have no problem citing pure pinwheel-eyed science fiction as a rationale for war. And this brings me to my next question about this, which was, this is really not our war. This is Israel's war, right? Like every time they ask Trump about, what's your goal here? What's your exit strategy? What do you hope to accomplish? And Trump is really like, he really can't say anything other than reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which you could have done by just not bombing Iran on February 28th. But um, it seems like we're fighting Israel's war for them. They've wanted to go to war with Iran for a long time. And obviously, if you had the United States military at your beck and call, then you would want to use them instead of your own people.
Mhm.
Um, but I know Mike Huckabee, who is Trump's ambassador to
Mhm.
Israel,
Yep.
he's talked a lot about the end times. He's talked about how Israel should be entitled to virtually all the land in the Middle East, stretching into Lebanon and Jordan and Syria and Iraq. And, this is kind of really wacky stuff, right? But I mean, it's also when the Secretary of Defense belongs to this weird radical church, this is stuff that you have to take seriously.
Yep.
What do you think is because obviously the end times isn't going to happen and angels aren't going to come down from heaven and, destroy the world and the rapture and all that. By the way, the rapture is not in the Bible. That's another thing my dad
Yeah.
taught me. But
Yeah.
if you were looking at this objectively, and I say this from like the perspective of like a Pentagon senior staffer who's not a political appointee, who's a career person, what do you think they're going to try to do here to try to save face, right? Because Iran has been preparing for this for decades now.
Right.
And obviously, we can't commit ground troops. I think the initial ground war in Iraq was like 300,000 troops. I think we have maybe 50,000 there. Like, what do you think is their end game here to try to save face and try to, you know, claim victory and try to get out with their heads intact?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because you have the high levels. Apparently, by the way, I mean, according to a watchdog group, 200 or so non-commissioned officers the night before the first strike on Iran claim that they were told by a commander that Iran was supposed to light the signal fire for the second coming. So they were told that one of the justifications for the war was this like idea from Armageddon and Revelation. So they've already been complaining about that and worried about that, according to this watchdog group. And then on the other level, we've seen justification, I guess, or aestheticization of the war happening in the form of these weird AI videos and mashups that include Call of Duty images cut against drone images of strikes on Iran. Those things are unsurprisingly not playing very well with military families who don't like to see a joke made or grief gamified or murder gamified. So you sort of have to pick your poison. Like, is this a game or is it a outlandish work of fiction that like has hallucinatory details? Neither of them sit very well with Americans and military families, and neither of them will be very good pretext for any kind of draft, obviously. So if they're going to try to hype the war, sell the war to American people, and 60% of us oppose it, firmly oppose it, and then there's a lot of soft opposition other places. There's a lot of wait and see other places. They really are going to have to come up with something better than this. As for how they're going to save face, which I think is the question, right? It seems very likely we have another taco situation, like Trump always chickens out, which he did with the tariffs, that Trump will decide the gas prices, this is too humiliating. He's not getting his way. He keeps issuing ultimatums and not following through on them. He hypes the ultimatum. He goes to Graceland. Like he's just, in his own, his own psilocybin swirl of who God knows what it feels like in his head, right? He's definitely seeing like locusts with human faces when he closes his eyes. Let's just put it that way. But he can do a lot of sort of barreling through things and calling it a victory when it's not, and just backing out and saying like I did what I said or whatever, and causing a trail of tears and destruction in his wake, but pretend that it's okay. As for people in the Pentagon, I mean, in some ways, your question is the question of our time, which is why did Republicans go along with this? Why did they go along with this? We saw Paul Ryan. We've seen people jump off the ship, but we just haven't seen enough or really any sustained principled stands of just like, I can't do this. I'm not doing this. And, he did take over West Point, fire a lot of officers, purge DEI, bring in Pete Hegseth to, so that if you're too fat or too whatever, he really did try to shake everyone down and haze people enough that they would quit if they weren't ready to just be like a robot Terminator for the president's whims. So whoever's left there may be, in the tank for the whole project. I don't know about I don't I mean, didn't Doge get rid of a lot of those Pentagon people too? Like, my fear is just there's no one left. Like the board of West Point, I was sure when Trump was reelected that one thing we would see is generals saying no. That, there's no way. We saw in the first term the generals stood up to Trump. And I just was like, we don't have trained American generals, decorated American generals who are like lunatics like Mike Flynn. There's only occasionally you get that. There will not be enough. But it seems like for now, there are enough. And that's scary.
Well, yeah, it's like I think this administration has chosen loyalty over competence in just about every scenario.
Yep.
And I think we're seeing the payoff of that now, right? Like I remember in college, I took a class called Current World Problems, and we just debated world issues for like an hour, 3 times a week. And this is like 2006, right? It's like height of the Bush administration. And, this is a bunch of 19 and 20-year-old kids in Moorhead, Kentucky. And even then, like the liberals and conservatives all agreed, if you go to war with Iran, they're going to close the Strait of Hormuz, and then gas prices are going to go up, and that you just can't have that. And so everyone agreed on that. So like, my question has always been, if a bunch of 19-year-old kids in Eastern Kentucky knew that 20 years ago, why doesn't anyone in the Pentagon know that now? Or the
Yeah.
White House?
Do you
Or
remember right around then, John McCain was running, right? And he made this mistake of singing to the tune of Barbara Ann, the Beach Boys song, Bomb, Bomb,
Bomb
Bomb,
Bomb
Bomb,
Iran.
Bomb,
Yeah.
Iran, right? And he got in trouble for making fun of something that most people believe would be apocalyptically terrible because we didn't know if Iran had nukes or not. Israel in the region is nuclearized. And this was just so beyond the pale to mention, much less do. I mean, it was considered terrible for his campaign that he even used the expression bomb Iran. Now we are bombing Iran. I just, it is crazy. But it's like Trump tests the boundaries of everything. I mean, our Secretary of War Crime, Pete Hegseth, is someone who was considered far outside the pale, the Overton window, the whatever it is, of people in the military. He advocated for Eddie Gallagher, a war criminal. He advocated um, for the worst, calling them anti-woke or whatever policies. He was like talking about unconstitutional torture as something that we should celebrate, and just pure sadism. So we have him in charge of this Secretary of War, the War Department. We have Trump in charge, and quite demented, in charge of something else. So we've pushed past a lot of boundaries, like just checks and balances that have just been blown past. Like I just think of some just like giant truck rolling over toll booths, just like, it's someone just tries to be like, maybe we should have, an active war and there should be the War Powers Act. And it's just like, yeah, forget it. Emoluments, like, remember all the things we just like thought, hopefully, we're like, we have a system that contains this? No, we have a unitary executive who believes he's a king. And that's where we are.
Well, like you're talking about the just really radical beliefs of the Christian right and, how that plays out in government. I think we're also seeing that in the base too, right? So like you had this division between Christians on the right who believe in Catholicism, people like, Nick Fuentes and
Mm.
J.D. Vance and Candace Owens, and then Protestants, people like Erica Kirk and the Turning Point USA people. And, there's always been a little tension between, I grew up Methodist, there's always been a little tension between Protestants and Christians and Catholics.
Yeah.
But now I think with the Pope being American, you have Pope Leo XIV, who is avidly pro-immigrant, avidly anti-war, speaks out in favor of treating immigrants with dignity all the time,
Yeah.
and encouraging Catholic bishops in the United States in particular to use their platforms to speak out about that. It's
Yeah.
kind of creating this rift between Catholics and Protestants in the MAGA movement, right? So like, I was
Yeah.
so shocked to see Nick Fuentes, of all people, say, gosh, I miss Obama. This man is a neo-Nazi, misses Obama as president. He said, we had competent leadership then, and of course, J.D. Vance, all my Catholic friends will talk about, like, he's just embarrassing Catholic converts constantly, like
Yeah.
every time, like the Pope condemns the Trump administration, I just kind of feel like J.D. Vance kind of cowers a little bit. But what have you noticed, Virginia,
Yeah.
in just observing the Christian right and these two factions who were kind of increasingly at each other's throats?
Yeah.
I think the war is obviously the latest flashpoint, but I think this has been going on for a while and it's just kind of almost at a boiling point.
Yeah. So my parents, one is a Protestant Episcopalian, was a Catholic, my father. And when they got married, it was considered shocking for both of their families in the 60s. And now no one could possibly tell them apart. And I think when I, point out that J.D. Vance and Charlie Kirk didn't share the same religion, usually there's like no daylight in the Christian right. But I think one thing that happened right after Kirk's assassination, and certainly now with Israel policy, it's laid bare a certain fracture in how people read the Bible and literally interpret the role of the church vis-a-vis Jews. If they imagine that there's like a Judeo-Christian tradition, one short way to put it is the Catholics in this equation. And by the way, I'm leaving the Pope out because most of these people like Fuentes are far right of the sitting Pope. So that's why J.D. Vance and he have like shown down. They would more likely be aligned with something like Opus Dei. So like very right-wing parts that the current Pope is against. But without getting too complicated, and then, a one way to see this in play is Tucker Carlson, who people think is leaning Catholic right now. When he sat down with Ted Cruz and they had a discussion of whether the Israel of the Bible is the political state of Israel governed by Netanyahu. And Cruz said essentially yes, that the Israel of the Bible is the Israel of now, and that it's the obligation of all Christians. He's an evangelical to protect it and do whatever they can to arm it, protect it, and ideally bring about the prophecies in the book of Revelation. And Tucker Carlson said, "You got to be kidding. No, I believe," and this is where we can't get too excited about the Tucker Carlsons. He believes that the Jews killed Jesus and the church superseded the nation of Israel, and that the church stands against, or ought to stand in some ways, against Israel. So one thing I caution anyone on the left saying, "Oh, Candace Owens is making some sense because she's against the war," or Tucker's making some sense, Tucker Carlson's making sense. No, they're against the war because they're anti-Semitic. Now, what's interesting also, and you point out Nick Fuentes, Catholic neo-Nazi, Mrs. Obama, and that must show a certain evolution on his part. One thing I would argue that gets talked about less is that in the equation, the evangelicals are white nationalists, and they're typically quite racist about Black people, Muslims, and so on. But they're philo-Semitic because they see themselves as on a continuum with Jews. The opposite is true on the other side. So you have a quite diverse coalition. Fuentes is part Mexican. Candace Owens is Black. A lot of the manosphere guys who are converting to Islam these days, that's a whole other story, but they are sometimes biracial and they're drawn to Islam because they see it as the best way to oppose Judaism, which is like their least favorite thing. But so they're less likely to be white nationalists because the Catholic coalition or the body of the Catholic Church is very diverse. South America, there's Africans, there's, right? So like if yeah, but it's also very anti-Semitic, and the Catholic Church has a tradition. Not the current pope, but past popes have been very anti-Semitic and dangerous that way. So I think it is like just such a tinderbox. Like God help Erica Kirk and Candace Owens showing down on social media. Like, is this the great religious clash of our time? God knows. But nothing is helping us think clearly about what foreign policy vis-a-vis Israel should be. None of this is in secular terms. Like, I would like at this point to hear someone talk about democracy. I would like at this point, if someone sounded like George W. Bush, and I strongly oppose the Iraq War, but if they were making a coherent case for the war, a coherent neocon case for the war, I would listen. Stuff is like gibberish. It is crazy. Like they're talking about supersession, replacement theory, blah, blah, blah. Like stuff that should be on 4chan should not be our briefing documents for a war.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's when you put it that way, it's kind of like pretty much black and white.
Yeah.
And real quick, like everyone who's watching, thank you so much for watching. We've got over 300 people now. It just keeps on coming in, and we really appreciate everyone who's here and watching. We're here with Virginia Heffernan. She's a New Republic columnist, also co-host of the podcast Omni Shambles. She's also on Substack. You can find her on Substack. Magic Plus Loss is the name of her Substack. Go to virginiaheffernan.substack.com. I'm Carl Gibson, managing editor of Raw America. Thanks to everyone for coming here. If you really like what we're doing, we'd love for you to subscribe. Join the Raw American Network. We'd love to have you. Virginia, I want to get back into our conversation about, you talked about the manosphere and people converting to Islam.
Yeah.
And, as we're talking about the influence of religion on the far right, I was watching that Netflix documentary like everyone else was talking about. I had to watch it, Inside the Manosphere.
Yeah.
And it was so just kind of eye-opening in that there are clearly a lot of young men who are seeking, and these young men are not media literate. And so they're seeking on TikTok and Instagram, and they're finding these male influencers who try to give them the easy answer to be liked and be successful. And what you see from a lot of these guys is, yeah, they might have money, but all these manosphere guys are just as lost as they are, philosophically, spiritually. And, you mentioned, I thought this is an important point, Andrew Tate converting to Islam, not because he believes in the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but because this is a kind of a way to traffic their anti-Semitic conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
One thing that was in that Netflix documentary that the host, Lewis, I forget his name, that he talked about a lot was, Louis Theroux, that he talked about was the latent anti-Semitism in the manosphere. And so like Sneeko was in this documentary, and he was very blatant about it. But talk about just the danger of these young men who are looking for, rightly so, ways to survive in a brutally capitalist landscape, about how to survive and provide for your family and, be the kind of man that you want people to respect.
Mhm.
Falling down this rabbit hole and being suckered into these conspiracy theories and being grifted out of their money. I mean,
Yeah.
just give us a little crash course on that and just like what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, Louis Theroux's documentary Inside the Manosphere on Netflix, definitely worth watching. Uh, I agree with you that I didn't see these guys didn't seem like they were winning to me. It wasn't like you were just watching a bunch of winners. And Louis Theroux wasn't especially aggressive. It wasn't like a debate where he was like trying to show them as idiots. He just was letting them sort of be in the like existential sorrows of their choices. It doesn't look that fun to be this kind of particular kind of influencer who refers to like women around him as his dishwasher. One of them does that. And also, they're in the gym all the time, which just looks incredibly tedious. Like, if you just are like, what would my life be if I were at the top of the heap of life? And it wouldn't be like just sitting around in these rental apartments trying to like flog crypto and other grifts or like trapped like Andrew Tate, like they're all of their gods trapped in Romania facing extradition, like or in jail. None of this looks good. So I think pulling the camera back a little bit and just like asking any boy who decides that like this is the person he idolizes, just about anyone is leading a more interesting and robust and life filled with like love and chances to be good, right? Than they are. But as for the moving to Islam, so what you see a lot in the documentary is how important it is to how important it is that each one mogs the other. So, like, what is master of the group, like, dominates the other. And one way to dominate another man in this space, or it doesn't matter the gender, one way any influencer mogs another influencer is by being more outrageous. Like, a lot of female influencers get into this too. And to be more outrageous in the manosphere has been to move farther and farther and farther to the right. So, like, you test something by saying, like, I think women should stay home, or I think women, should stay virgins until marriage. But then that's not enough. It's they should be home and worship me. I want them to call me master. I only want to have sex with virgins. I only want to rape virgins. Right. And each time they get engagement because of the way the algorithms are built, they get hearts, they get stars, they get dopamine, they get followers, and they drive people to their grifts, which are mostly now crypto. And they make some money out of it. But, if they have a video that falls out or someone else shows them up on a video and they start getting no love, then they can't sell these like sketchy financial products. And so they dream of something still more shocking to say. And at this point, even it's probably to you and me, I wasn't actually that shocked by any of the stuff they say. Like, I'm sure I would have heard women shouldn't have that right to vote 10 years ago and thought, like, this is outlandish. How could anybody be against universal enfranchisement? Now it's like a thing those guys say. Like, those kind of guys say that shit all the time. And similarly, they say other right wing stuff on race, on gender, on Jews, on their anti-Semitism. Well, anyway, the humor is that the right wingers in the Charlie Kirk mode, so the Christian nationalists, after his assassination and before actually, Nick Fuentes, the neo-Nazi, as you say, framed him as kind of soft, like in a weird way that like he wasn't quite hard right enough. And so Nick Fuentes got attention for making Charlie Kirk, a white nationalist, seem not sufficiently neo-Nazi. So then they were moving to this like very right-wing form of Catholicism, the Opus Dei stuff that connects Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance and so on. But where do you go? You're all the way to the far to the right. Then they have the idea of like, I'll show you what real sexism looks like. And then they have a cartoon version of Islam. No one should mistake it for actual Islam. Actually, someone just said Nick Fuentes is in the closet. I just want to say one thing about Nick Fuentes and sexuality. He has said he's incel. He has never had sex. He's a virgin. The reason that is allowed among these Catholics is they have a tradition of celibacy with celibate priesthood and monks and nuns. And it's not even appalling for him to say he's celibate. That's like the ultimate masculinity. But for the family value set, maybe the people you grew up with as a son of a Methodist pastor, not wanting a family, not being a virgin at that age, being an incel at that age, not wanting children is like kind of crazy. Like it's really hard to imagine why that's manly. Anyway, blowing past Nick Fuentes on the right, we get to this cartoon version of Islam that Andrew Tate has embraced, that Sneeko has embraced, that some of the other born Muslims in the manosphere have embraced. So they've like taken back Islam. It has some kind of prayer rituals that it borrows from Islam, but mostly what they like about it is it's anti-Semitic. They just spout like Taliban stuff about women. I mean, God only knows, burqas, who knows, but it's just like they want to be farther right, way farther right than Charlie Kirk. I mean, simple Christian nationalism is nothing. Like, but it's very niche. I mean, there are not many people who are like, Nick Fuentes, the neo-Nazi, is not far right enough. So I'm going to have to tune into one of these fake Muslims. It's just, the optimism that came out of the documentary to me is like, they don't have a lot of places to go. Like, they've really cornered themselves. And yeah.
Well, and seeing Myron Gaines' girlfriend left him at the end was just like chef's
Oh,
kiss. Like, good for her. Like,
yeah.
Louis Theroux kind of just opened her world up. It's like, you don't have to put up with this, right? It's a big
Yeah.
world. You can just go somewhere else. And she did. So, like, good for her. And I think a lot of people will realize that, right? Like, when I was in college, it was the pickup artist trend was the
Right.
thing.
Right.
And, it's like, it just kind of evolves with the times and the culture. And it's like, men don't realize, like, once you stop, like as a straight man, once you stop doing the performative masculinity and just let it happen, it's so much easier. And life is so much better that way. So it's like if you're a man and you're struggling, like those are the last guys you should listen to. Like go find the friendly guy at the bar who's, wearing the safety vest and just got off work and he could probably give you some life wisdom and lessons.
Yeah.
Um any
Yeah.
any young man who's seeking, definitely don't seek on TikTok. That's all I can say about that. Um, Virginia, I want to get into one more thing here because I
Okay.
know we're coming up on an hour, but you wrote a really great piece, and I want to make sure everyone reads this. It's called "Yes, It's Fascism, but That Doesn't Mean We're Cooked," and you wrote that for the New Republic in February.
Mhm.
And a lot of this is about, just being very clear-headed about where we are and what this is. This is fascism. You open this up with an anecdote about the Italian Benedetto
Yeah.
Croce, if I said that right,
That's exactly it.
famous Italian philosopher, and he was, of course, he kind of predicted the rise of Mussolini. It's like this is what happens when people clamor for these types of leaders and these types of policies. Uh, Now you're seeing, I think, No Kings kind of illustrated. There's a popular resistance against fascism, and that's united. I was in Louisville's No Kings
Wow.
protest this weekend, maybe 5,000 people, which is a lot for Louisville.
Yeah.
And there were everyone from, I saw Democrats, I saw Republicans, I saw libertarians, socialists, anarchists, communists, and parents of young children, veterans, clergy wearing the cloth. And everybody was speaking out against fascism, against ICE, against the execution of U.S. citizens in the streets. Like everyone knows right and wrong. And when they see wrong, they want to call it out. And I think it's a very prescient moment of what I think could happen over the next few years. Because as hard as they push the pendulum to the right, eventually the pendulum has to swing back. And when you push it all the way to one side, it's going to swing really hard to the other side. Um, you wrote toward the end here, right wingers have managed to conflate liberal democracy with elitist posing.
Mhm.
Some leftists see liberal democracy as Mussolini did, nothing but rapacious capitalism.
Mhm.
But liberalism at baseline really is the best guarantor of liberty. It's time, evidently, for Americans to go back to the old gem, where the case for liberal democracy must be stripped down to basics. And what does that look like? And so you wrote, in our own illiberal society, Americans who hold political office or have any capacity, platform, or resources at all must stop yielding to idle anxiety and fight with everything they have to get our civil liberties and our free minds back.
Mhm.
Virginia, do you think this No Kings 3, I think 8 million, almost 9 million people across the
Impressive.
country, all 50 states, multiple cities around the world, I think even Antarctica, there's a few scientists who wrote No Kings in the Snow. Good for
Yeah.
them. Um, do you feel like we're kind of on the precipice of a new form of democratic advocacy in terms of like we're not just about voting. Now we're about civic action. Now we're about organizing in small groups and in our
Yeah.
communities. Like,
Yeah.
what's your take on all that?
So, I mean, this is gonna get a little corny, but maybe it's okay at the end. Some reason I get in my head all the time this moment in The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, which is, and it's the Grinch looking down on on Whoville, where they've been deprived of their presents, right? Thanks to him. And he says they were singing without any presents at all. And there's a way that I feel like when you look at the No Kings stuff, when you look at this alternative media ecosystem, you think like they really did, these group of people that can only be called fascists. That's exactly what they would have been called in their time. That's what even like lawyers in New York are saying. Like older lawyers, 70s, 80s, are like, well, I have to fight these fascist, I have to consider myself doing anti-fascist law. So I think we should sort of embrace the idea that that's where we are. But in spite of having blown past all these checks and balances, consolidating so much autocratic power in the central government, debasing the people who work for him and for the people who voted for him, that there's life yet. The so much of our media was captured, and yet we journalists are collectively building an incredibly interesting, pluralistic coalition or ecosystem of media that sort of they thought we couldn't do. And the same you see in same you see the same thing you see at the No Kings rally. You see people who understand in their bones what is endangered, what is dormant right now in American life. It is frankly, as critical as we all might be of liberal democracy in those words, we might say, there's too much money in politics, or we might say, well, there are actually too many Christian nationalists driving it, or rich people drive it. Liberal democracy is where our hearts are. You know it when it's under threat. Nobody heard about the SAVE Act and thought, oh, what we need are more restrictions on voting. That, like, there's just something in our human American hearts that contracts at the thought of keeping people from the polls or making it harder with literacy taxes. We grew up with stories about civil rights being one of the most important signature acts of democracy in the world, and it's really hard to imagine going back. And that's what you sort of see. Instead of people rising to this like insane challenge, like being revolutionaries, it's more like you sort of people sort of moving out of MAGA by kind of relaxing into what just feels right. Like, do you really think that the book of Revelation should be driving a war? Do you really think the president should be signing dollar bills and tearing down the East Wing? The people I know in MAGA who've left just said, like, come on, this is just wrong. It's just wrong. It doesn't feel right anymore. This is we're meant to be a nation of civil liberties, civil rights, and the consent of the governed. We're not an autocracy. We don't have a gift for being in an autocracy. We're too intolerant of autocracy. We, you know, so that's where I feel like we are. And I think there's very hopeful evidence, including the No Kings protest that are, really, really proof that something's changing.
Absolutely. Well, Virginia, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Really appreciate it. Everyone go visit her Substack, virginiaheffernan.substack.com. It's called Magic Plus Loss.
Yep.
She's also co-host of the Omni Shambles podcast, and she's a weekly columnist with the New Republic. So check out her stuff. She does really great work. And of course, obviously, if you like what we're doing here at Raw America, you're watching right now, please subscribe. We really appreciate it. Help us keep up the fight. Independent media is very important. Don't let the billionaires take it over. Virginia, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate
Thank
it and hope to
you.
have you back sometime.
This was great. We'll do it again.
Awesome. All right. Take care.